Okay, without further ado, let's begin. Let's hope my little clicker's working. So the title of this talk is Let's Talk About Coming Out, Supporting Those Disclosing a Sexual/Gender Minority Status.
I think the presentation is not being shared.
All right, and my little clicker. Come on, clicker.
Yeah, I think we share screen. Share screen. Yep.
There we go. Okay. Does it work? Yes. Okay. So first off, what is a gender or sexual minority status? So to begin, 7.1% of US adults identify within the queer or LGBTQ plus community. So just for conversation's sake, whenever I say LGBTQ plus or queer, I'm saying the exact same thing. Both are umbrella terms for anyone who just identifies other than heterosexual, which is predominantly romantic and sexual relations with those of a gender the opposite of yours. So Gallup's news poll, which is a reputable source coming out of Washington, D.C., they're a periodical, they noted this. And they checked in, I want to say in 2012, and this had nominally increased from what I think was around 6%. So more and more people are feeling more comfortable to identify within the queer community, at least in the United States. That's what the data suggests. So if you think about it, if there's over 200,000 US citizens and 7% of those are identifying as queer, that's a lot of queers. So that's good. It's a good thing. So when one discloses their sexuality, there's first the assumption that that person has to acknowledge that they have sexual thoughts and romantic feelings. Then they have to think about what their behaviors would be tied to that. And then less often, it's prompted internally. Well, it's prompted more internally than externally. So what that means is people with a sexual orientation minority status, it usually comes from within. They're realizing, okay, maybe I feel a bit different. Maybe I'm having thoughts and feelings that are a little different than what my counterparts, my peers are feeling. So typically, realizing that one is queer is usually an internal process. But that doesn't exclude, there's times where it's an external process, whether that comes through teasing, bullying, or simply other people just labeling you as a member of the queer community. That can also happen. This is in comparison to a gender identity. So one doesn't always have to disclose a gender identity, but it is usually brought up. If one discloses a gender identity, it's typically because the gender identity they hold within usually differs than the one they present with or the one they were assigned at birth. So identifying within a gender minority usually challenges the binary that we have in the United States and society at large. Typically, the gender binary is there are men, there are women, and those are the two genders, the two sexes that we have. Even though we know there's documented other sexes. There's XY female, XY male, XX female, XO, XXY, and XYY, I believe. So we have already 5 documented sexes, which already challenges the gender binary. So something's not adding up. So the comparison to a sexuality versus a gender identity, this disclosure is actually the opposite. It's usually prompted externally. It's usually other people telling you, oh, you look like a girl, as opposed to, not presenting like a woman, or maybe coming to realize that this is something other. So again, sexual minority status usually comes from within, that someone wants to disclose to the world. A gender identity status usually comes from outside, other people telling you, hey, you're different. But that's saying the opposite can happen for both sides. Sometimes someone just, let's say, for example, presents as masculine, identifies as male, but slowly realizes that, nope, I'm actually a woman and I identify as that. That's usually when it becomes intrinsic, but it's less common, but it still happens. Okay. When one has a sexual minority status, so they identify within the queer community, it requires different things than their heterosexual counterparts. Typically with sexuality, it requires medicine specific to sexual health and so much more. Medical needs of those with a varying gender identity, that includes medicine specific to gender affirming needs and also sexual health and so much more. So these are all tricky complications that someone who's thinking about disclosing their sexuality or their gender identity kind of can get nervous about, because it can be really scary to want to have to talk to your doctor about these things. So this is just setting the tone for what we're talking about today. When people are disclosing a sexual or gender minority status, they're disclosing either they identify within the queer community and that's their sexual orientation, or they could be, and at the same time revealing a gender minority status that they identify as a different gender than the one they were assigned and the one that society automatically projects and assigns to them. Making sense? Making sense, internet? Okay. Yes, clicker. I love clickers. Okay. So once you understood the difference between queer and LGBTQ+, which is the same thing, and once we understand the differences between sexual orientation and then gender identity, we can understand now what coming out even is. So what is coming out? I'm so glad you asked. So think of coming out, it's considered to be a very significant disclosure in life. It is a major life event. It is, first off, the acknowledgement of an identity, then developing the bravery and safety to disclose that to people. Not necessarily the world, but people. If you choose to disclose to the world, I mean, that's something we'll talk about many slides from now. So this significant life event, it's the acknowledgement of an identity that hall staff and partners compare to the negative and positive sequelae of trauma when understood and processed effectively. At the end of this, we'll find that, yes, the trauma from that likely occurs with growing up LGBTQ does need to be acknowledged, does need to be processed, but we don't need to ruminate. We don't need to stay there. There also has to be a heavy amount of resiliency that needs to be understood and developed. So that's, again, why the positive and negative sequelae of trauma. It's a fun mixed bag, if you've ever gone through it. So it's the people that we come out to, it matters. So some people have their own hierarchy of these are the people I want to come out to first, second, third, or these are the people I most care about their reaction to and least care. It could go many ways. The people who I typically hear from a clinical perspective that clients want to come out to is definitely their psychotherapist, if they haven't already, their medical doctors, their employers and their coworkers, most of the time. Siblings, old romantic partners, especially if they were playing it straight or dating or encountering people other than the gender that they're truly attracted to or genders. Parents and family, of course, including siblings like we mentioned. Neighbors, and this process of coming out to all of these people or the world, in my clinical observations, it can take sometimes months. It could sometimes happen on a whim. It could sometimes take years of development. And it's okay either way. It's about still holding your hand, holding the patient's hand, and meeting people halfway in this process. So which leads me to my next point, one of the really important things to understand when, first off, even just holding space for someone, meaning just listening to someone who's thinking about coming out or working with a client or just being an ally and hearing someone talk about these things, it's to understand who they want to come out to and in what form. And what I mean by that here is, do they intend to disclose all at once to the world? And in 2022, this could be done by a Facebook post. This could be done by standing off a rooftop and maybe a bunch of people hear you, assuming those people know you, or coming out can happen partially. For example, what if you are out to your friends, your circle of friends, not out to your coworkers? Or what if you're out to your siblings that you're very close to, but everyone keeps the secret from your parents or your grandparents? So is there one type of coming out? Not really. So it's good to really understand with that person what level of coming out they're wishing to achieve. Okay. From Clinical observations, and this is also backed up by research that an article I found like yesterday, so I haven't included the citation. I will have to. I believe it was a 2009 article, and it's still supported. The birth parents, or the people who raised you, so the primary caregivers, they tend to be the most significant responses that queer people care about. So forget everybody else. If you have primary caregivers, people who raised you and programmed you in a psychodynamic sense, those are the people that queer persons tend to really care about their opinion the most. They also, depending on one's age when they come out, they can be the determinant of keeping stable housing, being kicked out. They can be the determinant of one's self-esteem. Because again, from a psychodynamic perspective, they're the ones who taught you how to interact in the world. They're the ones who modeled healthy relationships or lack thereof. So again, if you get anything from at least what I've talked about up until now, the parents, birth or not, the parents of people who raised you are the most significant people's responses that a queer person cares about when they come out. Any questions so far? Any on the internet?
No questions right now.
Okay. Oh, now clicker. Come back, clicker. Come back, clicker. Yes. Okay. Clicker's work. Okay. So let's talk about the opposition. If a major life disclosure, like coming out, wasn't terrifying enough, what is the environment reinforcing or supporting? I'll tell you. The anti-LGBTQ laws and regulations to date. I think people have at least a historical understanding of how bad in the United States it's been to be queer. There was raids on bars, so many laws in the past about people potentially getting fired from their job just for identifying as gay or being found as gay. Discrimination, which isn't always sanctioned by law, but sometimes is too. So people know all of those horror stories, or how the Reagan administration didn't care one bit about those affected by HIV and AIDS. I mean, the list goes on. Currently, and this is taken straight from the Human Rights Campaign, they cited as of 2021 that there was over 266 anti-LGBTQ bills being considered during that time. And we are seeing some of them come into fruition, unfortunately. So just a few of the highlights from this wonderful flood of trauma. We have, for example, the no promo homo laws in 8 states already. So these were enacted almost 6 years ago. Does anyone want to take a stab at what the no promo homo laws are?
Just not promoting the homosexual.
Not speaking about it, yes. Yeah, so that's why you all came here. I'll explain it. So these are gag rules. Gag rules are a nickname to laws that basically tell you not to disclose or talk about anything. So they say like gag. So they limit what schools can speak on LGBTQ matters in class. Now, initially this started with health class. So it was opposition to talking about non-heterosexual sex. So in health class, it's hopefully where one receives at least institutional sex education. Should always be coming from the families though. But it started there. So they just wanted to talk about heterosexual sex, okay? Both males having sex with females, and that's it. There's nothing else. No psychoeducation, no education on anything else. So some lawmakers wanted to get in the way of that. So again, it started off with health classes and it's trickled into other topics. So now in English class, you can't read, I don't know, probably Brokeback Mountain, which is a short story. Like in high school classes, you're in these areas, you're not allowed just queer content whatsoever in the education system, outside of, and which is expanded outside of just health. So these are problems, in my opinion. Also, recently, governors have signed measures regarding athlete bans in Arkansas, Missouri, Tennessee, Alabama, South Dakota. And this is in regards to trans athletes playing on the gender teams that they identify with. So, particularly females. So if someone was born male, transitioned to female, identifies as female, they are, in these states, not allowed to play on the girls' soccer team, for example. And when you talk to bioethicists, such a hard word. When you talk to a bioethicist, they still completely and clearly note that transitioning and hormone replacement therapy is not a performance enhancer. In fact, depending on what hormones you're transitioning towards as your dominant sex hormones, it could actually be an inhibitor. So these athletes are actually working extra hard. But that's nothing new for minorities. So if you're a minority, you have to work extra hard in general. And that's where it comes off in this. And then I'm sure everyone has heard of topic, don't say gay in Florida. One more form of a gag rule where talking about queer content is not encouraged, not enforced. Any questions, comments so far? Internet?
I just have a quick question because I know I've had a lot of conversations about the athlete stance. Are you saying with the that if a male to female, their physical ability in that sport will also decrease with the hormones, or be more congruent with the?
So what I've seen, God, I'm forgetting their name right now. This was 2013. This was a pro boxer, born male, transitioned to female, competed in female Muay Thai boxing. And they were noting in a GQ article that competitive edge, that last little bit that their coach was hoping to get out of them, they felt was actually being thwarted by the estrogen and progesterone that was being added to their body. The coach was saying, not a medical doctor, but the coach was saying, yeah, if you have that extra hint of testosterone that you were born with, yeah, maybe you'd have that competitive edge. Because this athlete, and I'm forgetting her name, I'm sorry, it's the one that Hulk Hogan was talking crap on. I'm gonna have to find that later. Can you write that down on mine?
Yeah.
So I can remember.
I'm actually looking for it.
So it actually, depending on where you transition from. So if you're transitioning to a state where you have
Semenya, sorry.
what was that?
Semenya?
Okay, so that athlete. So from what I hear anecdotally, if you're transitioning to a lower level of testosterone, that actually has been found anecdotally to be actually a performance decreaser, I guess, inhibitor, performance inhibitor.
So as our role, would you just say psychoeducation about that's a good way to kind of address that? Because I know in social media stuff, there's so many solutions, and one of them is, transgender athletes playing their own game, which I think is messed up because then that feeds into that stereotype that there's a third gender when a trans female is still a female. So how would we address that from like a psychological standpoint, just psychoeducation though?
I mean, that's the foundation of our work. Yes, psychoeducation, knowledge is power, as cheap as it sounds and cliche. Knowledge is power. And also we'll get to it where we talk about connecting people with the right type of physicians that can help them with it. Also getting them connected to appropriate resources that can provide support and accurate knowledge about it too. I'm not talking about just Facebook groups, which aren't always bad. But yes, so good inquiry. I think I'm seeing something.
Yeah, so we have a question from Tiffany, and Tiffany was asking, what is the law's motivation for limiting these conversations in classes? And I know minority groups are very much oppressed, but I'm curious to know their motivation for limiting them.
The number one thing is that these are children. We shouldn't be teaching them about sex because inherently when you think about sexuality, you think about sexual behaviors, which is also not even a microaggression. That's a huge aggression to the queer community. If I'm telling you, hello, I'm a gay man, you can instantly think, oh, I know how he likes to get down. And I didn't even ask for that. So that's just using myself as an example. So it's the misnomer that sex is necessarily romance and intimacy, and that sex is taboo for children to learn about. God forbid we teach children about their bodies and how to healthfully interact and exchange their bodies with other members. So that's the number one argument. We're at too early of an age, we're educating kids on sex, first and foremost, and then we're educating them on sex outside of heterosexual, which goes against the dominant community and Protestantism, which runs this country. Sorry about that. Thank you, very good question.
And Tiffany also said Kelly Maloney might be the athlete you're thinking about. I'm not sure.
Thank you. I'm open to anyone's accurate information. Okay, moving on. So the costs of not disclosing or staying in the closet. So I realize this term is evolving. So has everyone heard, show of hands or show of virtual hands? Everyone's heard of the term in the closet, right? Mm-hmm. In the closet is the colloquialism towards not disclosing your gender or sexual minority status, and coming out of the closet is the opposite, which is what we're talking about today. It's existed for decades. I used to think Ellen DeGeneres came up with it. She didn't, but she definitely used it and maximized it. So good for her. So the cost for staying in the closet or not disclosing your gender or sexual minority status. First and foremost, living inauthentically and typically developing false personas. The reasons that sometimes people develop a false sense of self can be various, but particularly to queer people, I mean, if you live in a state where you're going to get beat up or maybe murdered, so assaulted or maybe murdered for living authentically, that makes sense why it motivates some people to not disclose about that. And we'll talk about that more when we talk a little bit more about straight acting. I also have a talk next week that everyone's welcome to attend where I focus more on the straight acting as a barrier to coming out. Also, people living inauthentically and staying in the closet tend to have lowered self-esteem and poor self-image. If you believe that you belong to a disgusting subculture of society, or if you are going against, the all-powerful creator of the universe, or you are shaming your family, your culture, your parents, how can one develop healthy self-esteem? I'm not sure how that exists. So it makes sense that those in the closet inevitably do show signs of lowered self-esteem and poor self-image. Yay, fun stuff. Okay. There's typically a sense of fear and hypervigilance towards being outed. So if I work with a client, I always ask them, if they're still closeted or they're not out to everybody, I ask them how scared they are just of being out. And in a few slides from now, I'll talk about also incorporating that in just psych screeners and about worried thoughts and excessive negative thinking. So hypervigilance, it's a real thing. Some queer people in the closet believe if they wear anything near a pink color or a pastel hue, that's going to out them. And who knows? And some people believe if they swish their hips a little bit when they walk, that is going to out them. That if they truly enjoy and participate in the sport they love, it's going to out them. If they truly participate and enjoy an activity they like, such as a boy playing with Barbies, that's going to out them, and etc. So again, inauthenticity is one of the hugest markers of distress for queer people closeted. So anxiety symptoms of excessive worry, like I said, negative self-talk, self-aggression, self-hatred, and these can become behavioral. Can anyone think of any forms of self-harm? Doesn't have to necessarily be suicidal.
Cutting or excessive drinking.
Yeah, both of those. So self-mutilation in the form of cutting. If people don't physically like the body that they're in, sometimes people like to change it or aggressively attack it. Yes, definitely from the stance I come from with my substance abuse specialty, chronic use can be a form of self-harm. It's arguably a parasuicidal form of living. If you don't like yourself, then what's the point? Okay, I'm going to drink this and pop this, and let's see what happens if I wake up. Many people just don't like themselves at that point in their life. That's also where I hear problematic sexual behaviors where people want to go numb. Just in general, if you don't like who you are and you think the world also doesn't like you, who doesn't want to check out? And I'm not saying commit suicide, which can also happen, unfortunately, but escaping themselves. And we escape ourselves through many means, through thoughts, behaviors, and different actions. Okay, more on the fun train of consequences of staying in the closet. Post-traumatic stress. So again, tying it back to just coming out. Coming out is associated to a lifestyle event, a major event that one goes through. Major events such as car accidents, giving birth, earthquakes, etc., all can get stored within the body. So if anyone's ever read The Body Keeps the Score, it highly emphasizes the mind-body connection. The positive and the negative get stored within our bodies. So if you're constantly going through life not liking yourself, being hypervigilant, that may manifest very likely in physical and psychological symptoms. Okay? And then my clinical observations, what I see is of the predominantly queer people I work with or their allies, it's really hard to find your tribe. Who doesn't like friend circles? Even the most introverted person still likes to know that they have their tribe, people like them. Even if it's a bunch of introverts all on a Zoom call and everyone's scattered throughout the country. People like to have a tribe. And being in the closet keeps people from finding their tribe or their sub-tribe. I mean, the queer community is vast and huge, and people love to stereotype themselves and say like, oh, I'm a this, I'm a that, I'm a butch, I'm a femme, I'm a twink, I'm this, I'm that. People love to subcategorize, but you can't even participate in that if you're not allowing yourself in the tribe. But it also cuts people off to fellow queer friends, which is very, very protective in psychological development as a queer person. And also partners. If you're not out, you're not able to brandish your flags as a single person looking to date, how do you expect to meet partners? It's really challenging for the people I work with that are still closeted. Then also, it's really sad on this part, homonegativity, internalized heterosexism, and just a lack of insight and education overall. So homonegativity is when, after society has beat you down with heterosexism and just homophobia, it's when the queer person actually starts to buy into and believe and perpetuate the negativity towards queer people. So this may be, for example, this may be a queer person who has to let you know they vehemently don't like Drag Race. They vehemently identify within the stereotypes of their gender. So if they're feminine, they're like, no, I'm super effeminate. I'm nothing like that. Nothing like those other lesbians. Or, you know, a queer man who's like, nope, I'm super masculine, I'm super macho. Anything other than that is just gross or bad. So that's homonegativity. That's internal for queer people. Heterosexism, again, part of the psychoeducation we'll talk to you about later. Heterosexism is just understanding that straight is the norm. Straight is right. And then the lack of education. Some queer people don't know who Marsha P. Johnson is. Some queer people don't know who John Fryer is. Some queer people don't know who Ellen DeGeneres is. Like, these are like some of the trailblazers of the community. And some just don't have that education. And one way of staying strong and rooted in a community is to know its history. So staying in the closet, not so fun in my opinion, and not so fun in my observations. Yes, clear. Okay, how are people feeling? Before I get into how do we assess the readiness for coming out?
I have a quick question.
Yeah.
Can internalized homophobia and homonegativity be used interchangeably, or are they two different concepts?
I think I try to think of internalized homophobia as a cognition, the thought,
Okay.
and I think homonegativity is more of the behavior, the action. So if I do believe that heterosexual is the way to go, those are my thoughts. But if I'm actually like perpetuating the word faggot, or if I'm actually not trying to befriend people once I find out they're queer, and just trying to have a circle of straight people, that's more of an action, at least in my perspective. Really good question. Yeah, because I know we get into all these jargon and all these different terms, and it's just hard to say them all. Like homonegative, heterosexist, homophobic, all of that. Okay. Anything from the internet? Okay. Okay. All right. So how do we assess if someone's ready to come out? Well, first off, if the client, I'm thinking from a clinical perspective, if the client says, I want to come out, I'm not happy, well, there you go. That's a good goal for the treatment plan. But if it's a little more subtle, it's assessing all of these things. So with all people who are anticipating a possibly traumatic event or have gone through traumatic events, I mean, these are your bread and butter. You want to screen for depressive symptoms, you want to screen for anxious symptoms, and you want to assess for post-traumatic stress. So easy, I always say, don't work too hard if you don't have to. In the public domain, we got the PHQ-9, particularly question 9 for suicidality. And we have the G87, and then particularly on the questions about excessive negative thoughts or constant worried thoughts or feeling keyed up. Those are good ways to probe if the patient endorses higher scores, so scores of 3 or so on those. And one good one I really like, I like the revised PC-PTSD-5. This is through the first two, the PHQ-9 and G87 are through Pfizer, Big Pharma. The PC-PTSD-5 is through the Veterans Affairs of the US. And those 3 are in the public domain. So those are 3 easily accessible, affordable ways to at least set the tone for helping your queer patients go through this process. As always, and again, this is my rubber stamp, but unfortunately, the queer community has a significant amount of substance use and misuse. Again, my theory is people need to escape themselves. And if you don't like yourself and you think the creator of the universe also hates you, who doesn't want to escape themselves through a substance? So, assess for alcohol and other drug use. So, freebies in the public domain, the audit C, the DOS 10. Also, other ways. Come on. Come on. Come on. Let's see how this goes. Okay. So, some ways that I have devised on assessing people's substance use and misuse for queer persons and allies alike are these 3 worksheets that I use. So I have my OAT devices, reality check, and talking about recovery. OAT devices is a way to just gather history of substance use through the kitschy means of getting, the stories that they liked. What did they like about their substance use and misuse? Then the reality check, the second counterpart, is basically like a glorified DOS 10. It asks about, okay, now what are the consequences? What's some of the realities of some of your substance use and misuse? And then talking about recovery, the third installment of this bundle of 3 AOD worksheets, it's helping a person devise their treatment plan for recovery, helping them set up support, and helping them not relapse. So these are the main ways that I've devised over the years on how to assist people with substance use and misuse. Any questions on those? There we go. Okay. So next, we want to assess the individual's health psych and insight. Do they know much about their body? Do they have an understanding or an appreciation for the mind-body connection? So this could be as easy as, did you know your upset stomach may actually be caused by something psychological? Or did you know that oftentimes your headaches can easily be addressed through drinking water and maybe taking a mindful moment? Also assessing, do you even know what mindfulness is? How much history do you know about the queer community? How much do you know about sexual health? How much knowledge and information did you get on sexual and reproductive health? So assessing all of this for the patient. Next, with assessing the readiness for coming out, we want to explore painstakingly the time of disclosure. This is very personalized, so I really suggest working collaboratively with the client on when they feel comfortable coming out. And again, taking into account, do they want to come out to the world at once? Are there people who already know their status? Are there people who they vehemently don't want to know? It's about tailoring it to the client's needs. So some of the little anecdotes I hear, sometimes people still believe the stereotype of they should go home for the winter holidays and tell their family. That's fine if you want to. I've also heard some of the anecdotes of people feeling like they tainted a holiday, like, oh, I ruined Thanksgiving by coming out, or things like that, which personally I feel is heartbreaking. So some people prefer to set a specific time free of other compounding events. Some people like to do it during a certain time, and different strokes for different folks. If people are more conscious about the time they come out, try to think, maybe not around someone's birthday, maybe not around an anniversary, maybe not around a significant event for the family. If you feel people will form a positive association to maybe a holiday or such, or a special time for the family or the culture, go for it. But again, it has to be really painstakingly tailored to the client. And obviously, make sure, in your opinion, you and the client both agree that they're ready to come out before they actually execute this major life disclosure. Also, the nitty-gritty, the unfun parts of this work. You have to assess for their safety. So would there be threats of violence to them if they disclosed? Would their physical safety be compromised? And do they already have a history of trauma that would just be exacerbated by fears to come? And truly listening to their experience, truly seeing if these are rational fears based in, reality are these irrational fears based in homonegativity, heterosexism. So for example, if, you brought home a bad grade and one of your parents gave you a black eye, maybe disclosing your sexuality might not be met with happiness and maybe met with the same aggression. Maybe not. So it's, again, assessing the history and seeing what the family has already done in the past with major life events. Another major life event I like to compare this to is like announcing a pregnancy. Typically a positive disclosure, but still a disclosure that can be nerve-wracking for those doing it. So use that as a comparison sometimes. Next, we need to develop contingency plans. So if you fear X, Y, and Z will happen, how can we put A, B, and C in place? Like, straight up, I hear this less often these days, which is nice, but sometimes people get kicked out for coming out. So they come out to their family of origin, and then they're no longer allowed to stay there. So they're unhoused, unsheltered. Some more people. Sorry, I'm just committing more people. So, developing contingency plans. So that involves a little bit more work on the clinician's end, because you have to find resources. Are there shelters for queer youth? Are there shelters for just queer persons in the local area? Do they have friends who would be willing to let them stay for a little bit? Do they know basic self-defense and safety awareness if they have to? Who are these people that they fear violence from? Is this valid? Like, you know, if you're 6'7" and the people who might be aggressive towards you are like 4'9", okay, well, maybe you actually have a little bit of buffer room, you know, of your safety. But who knows? That was just a facetious example. So, is this something that has to be explicitly talked about with the client, maybe even written down, maybe mutually understood, screenshot it, understood of, okay, if you disclose and you're met with aggression or violence or anything other than overwhelming support, what can you do? What can you do to stay safe, stay sane, and still continue to find your tribe and immerse yourself within this beautiful community? So, next step, kind of in line with what I just mentioned, provide resources, resources, resources. So I'll give you some near the end of today's talk. However, if you're an allied clinician or a queer clinician yourself, I suggest put yourself in the mindset of, if you're queer, remind yourself what it was like to, before you came out, if you have come out, in whatever sense that means to you, remind yourself what that was like. What resources would you have liked? And now that we have the internet in our pockets, it makes it much more accessible. So give to your clients the experience you wish you had. If you're one of our allies, an allied clinician, imagine what it would be like to disclose something you were very nervous about. So let's say, depending on people's lifestyles, if you had to announce an unplanned pregnancy, what would that feel like? What resources do you wish you had? Or what if you had to disclose something that you just weren't sure was going to be met with positivity? Or think about it. Let's say you've gotten a colorful hairstyle or a different hairstyle. You're not sure if it looks good on you or not. So that hesitancy to show your friends because you don't know if it's going to be met with positivity or anything else, think of that as a mild example of what it's like to put yourself in that moment. And that can help inform a beautiful Google search that will help you find resources, resources. Again, I will also provide some too. And if anyone has other resources that aren't listed here, please send them my way. Okay, again, with assessing readiness. Also, let's just look at their hopes, their fears, and the reality of the situation. If you fear that you are going to be tarred and feathered and kicked out of the community, yet you live in Berkeley, really, help your client bring them to reality about the situation that, no, they're actually in one of the most supportive areas you can be in, and helping them through that. So, again, hopes, fears, and reality. Sometimes it's valid. What if you are in Alabama where they have no promo homo laws? If you're about to move there and you think you're just going to live your out queer lifestyle, let's look at the reality of that. Okay. And then the intention, again, the sequelae of the trauma and then the positivity that can come from coming out. In time, the concern is about building confidence and deconditioning the negative self-talk and internalized homophobia that may be taking hold, or may have lived within the person's mind for decades, sometimes, or a lifetime. Okay, any questions on, after I've talked about the readiness for coming out, how do we assess for this major disclosure? Okay. Yes, Clicker. All right, so let's talk about some compounding factors to coming out. As if it wasn't stressful enough, we have to talk about the intersections we all hold, okay? Ethnic identity and race. If you already belong to a minority status, a visible minority status, maybe your skin color is different than the dominant community, you already know what it's like to live with minority status. So what's it like to live with 2 or 3 or 7 different intersections? That has to be compounding to the experience. Tied into that, but I give it its own bullet point, culture. If your ethnic identity lends a different cultural experience than the dominant community of the United States, because that's where we are right now, that can be some factors. What if you are told that your culture's belief in the universe's creator or creators doesn't like you? Or that your acts, your thoughts, your romantic thoughts, feelings, and behaviors are an abomination to a higher power? What if within your culture or your nation, they don't, it just doesn't exist? Like, oh, gay doesn't exist. What if that level of ignorance, exists where you come from? Okay, whether culturally, ethnically, nationally, or such. Or what if you're in a country where they have no promo homo laws? So we just can't talk about people like you. It's too disturbing for the kids. How does that compound and add to our distress? Probably a lot. Then also, the three are so blended. Ethnic identity, culture, and religion, faith. Again, what if your higher power doesn't agree with it? Or what if the holy doctrine associated to your belief system doesn't agree with your sexuality, or straight up says it in the doctrine, or makes negative comments towards people within your sexual orientation? I think some research out of 2020 coming out of Colombia, noted that for Hispanics or those with Latin America, one of the number one factor, besides disapproval of their parents, the number one factor was displeasing the Christian God, the Abrahamic God. If your community highly identifies through a religious system, and that religious system does not support your sexual orientation, we got some problems. And then gender. There is, back when we were only believing in 2 genders, I remember clinically seeing a major difference. The world was more open to gay men because they could be fun and whimsical and entertaining, as opposed to queer women. Maybe we can say that. Okay. That's how it typically was. Now, if you're coming out as queer in terms of your sexuality, and then maybe you're coming out as genderqueer, that's 2 forms of disclosure. Not everyone's even going to understand what those 2 intersections even mean. So you're non-binary and you're a lesbian? Like, how does that work? It does, but that adds more stress on the person already disenfranchised. It's having to work harder, which, again, very familiar for people with minority statuses already. Straight acting. This is another big topic, so big that next week I'm doing a discussion, a webinar just on this topic alone. Straight acting has been one of the most problematic barriers I've personally seen in my clinical caseload based in Los Angeles. I see it predominantly with queer men and queer women, but I see it in other ways too. I see it in passing for one gender with gender identities as well. So like the examples I can give, for queer men, masculinity is a positive stereotype, is a benevolent stereotype in the queer male community. So if you're masculine, that's great. So if as a coping mechanism and a way to keep yourself safe, you've had to develop masculine ideals, even if that's just not your personality, well, unfortunately, maybe I won't qualify it, that gets reinforced within the community. So you hear it all the time. I hear from my clients all the time. They're seeking a masculine guy, yet they're very queer themselves, but they're seeking someone masculine. So if you have found a successful way of adopting a false self or a persona that is more masculine as a maybe more feminine queer man, and you lean into it and you start getting praised for it and you start getting lauded for it, that gets reinforced. So this obstacle to you living authentically gets reinforced, and sometimes we adopt it. If the world keeps telling us you're a great masculine man, sometimes people don't want to give that up. That's what privilege is. The hardest thing with relinquishing privilege is just that, relinquishing it. So I see that as a huge barrier to people living more authentically. And then, of course, the word of the day, homonegativity. These are some of the most horrible compounding factors, because if internally you think your sexuality is a bad thing, who wants to disclose that? Sad stuff. I need to implement like lighthearted jokes somehow, respectful lighthearted jokes. Unless you don't want to find it out. Okay, I want to give this one, you know what, let's pause right now. Yeah, let's take about a 5-minute break. If people have questions, I'm happy to answer them in the interim. We'll pause for the next 5 minutes, everyone on the internet, and we will resume at, basically 1:05-ish, giving a few more wiggle room.
There's cake in this little area because it's one of our Maria's birthdays. So, so if you guys want some, yeah.
Okay, in person.
I'm putting. I make notes of like who's here, so I'm gonna put like I think we're on.
Here are Tim chat.
comment the whole time. I'm like, wait.
Okay, welcome back, everybody. Should I click works? Click the work? Yes, click. I love clickers. Really good. Okay, so welcome back, everybody. So what we covered in the first hour was what is a gender or sexual minority status, what can be done in terms of coming out, living authentically, what are the consequences of not coming out or not disclosing and living inauthentically. That's looked at. And next, we're going to look at treatment planning for queer persons. We have an experiential coming up that I think can be done also virtually. And then we're just going to continue on. We're going to talk about treatment planning, how to hold space for queer people, and then education on allyship. So, yeah, you got one. So, first and foremost, treatment planning for queer persons, especially when their queer identity is up topic. But when you think about it, most of our work is geared towards relationships. So all of our patients at some point are concerned about their dynamics with other people. That's what makes us mentally ill oftentimes. So first and foremost, if a patient is presenting with distress, likely tied to the coming out experience, no matter where they are in this process, first and foremost, we assess for the readiness for coming out. Is that even a concern, or is that even one of our treatment goals that we're going to look at currently or in the future or ever? Once we've assessed that and assessed their level of readiness, which can be at any point where it is, we need to then acknowledge, explore, and process their experience of growing up LGBTQ. I have, over the years, devised the process questions I use in talk therapy into a psychotherapy worksheet, which I can show you all right now. There we go. Okay. So, there's the thing. So my worksheet, growing up gay. I'll just give you an example of a couple of the process questions that I've devised over the years. So, taking it from the beginning, one's origins, what do you remember your mother saying about LGBTQ persons growing up? These are process questions meant to help people uncover and explore this unique experience to the queer community. Do you remember your elders having opinions on the queer community? These are all the formative relationships and memories that form our identity. Let's jump ahead. What was dating like for you growing up queer? Did you get the chance to date the people of the genders you wanted? Rich with trauma, dental trauma.
Would you do these in session with your patients, or would you do them like have them take it home and then like process and process in session?
Yeah, very good question. I will answer that in a moment. One more question. Think for a moment that your straight counterparts likely didn't have to come out. Do you have any thoughts to process on that? So these are just examples of the process questions that I've used over the years and used with different clients. What was just asked in the audience right now is how do I do it in the session? Do I use it strictly manualized of me and the client in the room using the worksheet together? They fill it out on a clipboard and maybe I read off the questions. Or is it more as homework? So we have our talk therapy session, their experience of growing up queer comes up, so I leave them home with something, maybe from a dynamic perspective. It's a transitional object that they can take home a piece of me and the work and bring it back for accountability. My answer to those two examples is yes. With manualized therapy or at least structured, semi-structured therapy, both can work. So these worksheets can supplement the therapy you're already in, and it can really help inform what it's like to explore these topics, especially if it's an allied clinician who never had to go through these and is only based off the client's words. My worksheets can be used as homework assignments to tide someone over. I've heard them be used as little boosters in between every other week's therapy. So they have therapy with you 1 week, they're expected to complete the worksheet in 2 weeks' time and come back together and we'll look at it to process. So manualized therapy can work many different ways. So that's why I try to make it digestible for clients to use on their own and understandable for allied clinicians to be able to understand. Okay, so getting that. Okay. So next, it really behooves us with actually getting into the work with queer people who are somewhere around coming out of the closet, explore their views on masculinity and femininity and passing for straight. Very big pieces in the queer experience. So how over the years have I devised that one? Well, my straight acting worksheet. So we'll just skip to some of the process questions. So assuming a person identifies as a straight actor or that they care about passing for straight for either means of protection or they actually get praised for it. One example of these process questions listed on this worksheet are, does so-called straight acting come with some kind of psychological cost? Or is it emotionally effortless? Indeed. Maybe it's gratifying to do it well. At the same time, there may be negative emotions too, because it can be burdensome or one may hold resentment for having to do it all. Describe your thoughts below. It really helps people deconstruct this mask that they may have to wear or choose to wear. Some examples are, have you ever been praised for being straight acting? If so, what was that like for you? Is there some time you like it, other times you don't? Does straight acting help to keep you safe? Maybe share a variety of experiences you've had with this. And again, you can do this in the room with the client. You can also, again, assign this as homework. There's a good amount of research, and I'm forgetting their names. There was a 2010 article that putting thoughts to pen and paper helps you consolidate your affect even more. So talk therapy, plus journaling, plus homework assignments, all helps encode and consolidate the work that we're doing. The neural pathways that we're trying to rewire for our patients. Yeah. Let's dive into one more question. So more behavioral examples. Have you ever had to change or alter your voice or manner of speech to hide your sexuality? Describe these experiences in the context in which you do it. Because again, if you're a queer male with the stereotype of gay voice, do you deepen your voice an octave when trying to pass for heterosexual? Do you raise your voice an octave when you're around your girls? So who's to say? It's a mix of experiences.
One of the audience wanting to know, are these resources available online?
Okay, yes, I will get to that in a moment. To whoever in the virtual audience is asking, yes, all of the resources I'm showing and all of the labors of my research, they're all available on my website, and I will direct you to where later on in the slides. Okay, next, we need to help, again, as I've been suggesting, help them acknowledge and process trauma while extrapolating and highlighting resilience. We can't take a fully positive psychology approach and be like, let's just not dip into the trauma. Cute, but no. Like, you need to acknowledge and appreciate a person's experience. And at the same time, yes, let's not dwell in it too long. But let's dwell in it as long as that person needs to desensitize themselves to negative thoughts, feelings, and affect from traumatic events, such as bullying, discrimination, or just the anxiety of wishing to come out. Okay? How do we help them acknowledge and process trauma while developing resiliency? I'm so glad you asked. I have another worksheet for that. I'm getting this toggle. Okay, my worksheet titled Baggage Claim. It's a kitschy way of exploring traumatic events, baggage we carry. So, for example, with these process questions, it has us look at, so-and-so showed me or challenged me or helped me realize or taught me in a hard way that. John, for example, taught me those who gossip with you will gossip about you. And what happened was, and then you get the patient to open up more and explore that event. These can be light and facetious. These could be traumatic events of saying, you know what, I tried to come out to my dad and he beat me up. Trauma takes whatever form it needs to and however it needs to be explored. We simply, as psychologists, depending on your theoretical orientation, we present as the neutral stimuli, much like a worksheet, and we let them project and fill it in with whatever their experience is. So exploring traumatic events in a safe environment, such as talk therapy or a psychotherapy worksheet, is a good way of extrapolating this. Also, my worksheets do at the end try to always bring it back to the negative. So it's looking at triumphs, resiliency, things you've learned. So this is the approach I take with working with queer clients. Okay. Nice. Okay, now let's do that. Come back. I feel like it's a lightsaber. Like I'm waiting for the red beam to come out. Okay, so next, when we are first and foremost developing rapport with our clients, which is just the crown jewel of our work. That is what outcome research says is the most effective factor in psychotherapy, regardless. Even if you are well-versed or not less well-versed in queer theory, the fact that you can develop strong therapeutic alliance, get a good rapport, that's going to be the golden nugget that helps them. So one way to do this is through, well, I'll jump back, is through humor, allowing humor to be in the space. The queer community is well known for camp, is well known for resiliency in this form. So being able to joke or laugh about situations. To quote Father Freud himself, humor is the cornerstone of our truth, translated from German roughly. So whenever we are making a joke, we are still talking about the truth, we're just finding a way to make it more palatable. So humor is very helpful in developing resiliency for queer people. And queer people have the stereotype, the benevolent stereotype of being more entertaining and more fun. So might as well lean into that a little bit with your queer patients. Allow them to joke, because sometimes when they make a light joke, it's not light. They say like, oh yeah, dad beat me up, but no worse than they beat me up on stage last week. That little joke right there can help you process, and that's your little wedge into that traumatic event, that experience. So humor can be very helpful in developing and maintaining resilience. One little caveat, I'm forgetting the article, I think it was a 2011 article. It shows that self-deprecating humor can be a slippery slope though. So I had one patient who was a stand-up comedian, and the crux of stand-up comedy currently in culture is self-deprecating. So I'm like, okay, it's humor, I'll allow it, but let's try to be nice to yourself, but that doesn't sell so many tickets. So I'll let them be. Did I see a hand?
Yeah, back to what you were saying about like that preface that we can sneak in that joke, right? Like, how do we approach that as a clinician? Maybe this is like something as a seasoned clinician you know how to do very easily. But I think for me, like, I have patients that use humor as like a defense mechanism, right? And I don't know how to like make them feel like we can talk about it without like acknowledging the joke still, because obviously I don't want to laugh, but also like not laugh. Like, how do I just like turn that into what you were saying? Like, how do I have them like open up through that joke? Like, can you give us an example?
Yeah. So the question is, how do we help them find humor while appreciating and respecting their experience, and how do we, target that? First off, I say laugh. I say if you have a genuine human experience with someone, laugh. Sometimes our clients are funny. Sometimes it's their job. If something genuinely brings positive affect out of you, I think it's beautiful to model for the client. So it's acknowledging, yep, that was funny, and also acknowledging, you know what, many people use humor as a way to make reality a little more palpable, a little more digestible. Do you think that's something that's going on here? 9 times out of 10, they say, no. Then you just sit there, wait your 3, 2, 1. Then they'll usually open up again, 9 times out of 10. And so it's acknowledging, it's not rejecting them. So it's not blank facing and being like, that wasn't funny. It's acknowledging, appreciating humor, appreciating their intelligence, because you have to be a little bit of intelligence to be funny. You have to understand the situation, the context, and how to get a rise out of it. So acknowledge the humor, acknowledge the safety they feel around you, acknowledge their intelligence, and acknowledge that, yeah, it's a way of them keeping themselves safe. So once you've acknowledged and appreciated that, they typically felt heard, and you can continue saying like, okay, so dad beat you up pretty bad, it sounds like. You joked about it, a few moments ago. They usually open up. When in doubt, just 3, 2, 1, let them talk. Does that make sense? Hopefully that made sense, internet people. Always let me know if you can't hear me also. Okay. Oh, parenting. Okay, so humor, again, humor's great, just if it becomes self-deprecating, allow it, because yes, it can be funny, but also let them know, like, hey, self-deprecating humor is the lesser, it gets the B plus versus the A of coping. So, one of the huge things I'll keep emphasizing going forward is social support, family, chosen family, family of origin. So, if one isn't met with strength-based parenting, which I'll get to in the next slide, develop a chosen family, but don't let your sexual preferences be the filter by which you let people into your life. So that one little sentence is jam-packed with queer theory. So let me flesh that out. Strengths-based parenting is basically just supportive, loving parenting towards your kids or people who look up to you, who you mentor, that have come out. So if you're in some sort of elder mentorship or parentified position with a queer person, unconditional positive regard. If you aren't met with unconditional positive regard by the people you come out to, make your own family. If your family of origin or the people you consider family don't support you, get some more, get some new ones. I'm not saying discard those people because you may have a blood bond with them for the rest of your life and their lives. But if you don't have a satisfying, supportive family, make another one. To quote Beyonce, they wouldn't give her a seat at the table, so she chopped down the trees to build her own table. Build your own family of choice. Family of choice is nothing new to the queer community. It's been rampant in the culture and it's beautiful. It's why do you think they call ballroom houses houses with a mother? Those are not, well, they're typically not biological relatives, but they formed a community and a group cohesion such that they can compete, playfully and also kind of catty with other houses. So just listen to the terminology of all that. Queer people have started chosen family. So form that family of choice. And then the next barrier that I often hear, and this is from Dr. Alan Downs, a queer theorist as well, clinical psychologist. Part of his book, The Velvet Rage, has a wonderful skills section in the back that notes that, okay, if you want to form an inner circle of queer people, if you want to form a family of choice, great, do it. But don't make a chosen family full of people you're sexually and intimately attracted to. That just leads to complications. So form a chosen family, but again, don't let your sexual preferences be the filter by which you let people into your life. So for example, let's say, no matter the gender, you're attracted to 5'8" brunettes with brown eyes, okay? If you try to befriend a bunch of 5'8" brunettes with brown eyes, do you think there's gonna be a little bit of tension on your end at least? So try to defend people for their mind, their soul, whatever your belief system is. Befriend people who you get along with, who can be supportive, who have demonstrated empathy and compassion towards you, not necessarily a pretty face. But beauty's subjective. So whoever you think is pretty, sure, let them into your life, but don't try to think you're going to have the most platonic, healthy relationship with people you're very attracted to. So that's what that little dense sentence means. Other considerations when treatment planning for queer persons, hyperarousal may be of concern for your clients, especially when you do your assessment in the beginning and screen for post-traumatic stress. Hypervigilance, night terrors, etc., are those symptoms of post-traumatic stress. One way that we see hypervigilance manifest is through the increased need for social intelligence. One example of this increased need for social intelligence is through the stereotype of gaydar, which I think is real. I'm forgetting this one too. I think it was a 2009 article that helped support the notion of gaydar, of not a hypervigilance, but just a vigilance towards other people of your community as a survival tactic. You can't, the whole point of this is coming out. If people were able to authentically just be themselves, I wouldn't be here with this talk right now. So the culture has had to find many ways of getting to suss each other out, whether it's through handkerchiefs, through certain behaviors, through attending certain places at certain times. So that comes cognitively too. You can kind of tell, like, oh, is their voice kind of queer? Is their mannerism kind of queer? It's the thing. So one of the positive, this is an example right there. One of the forced behaviors that one has to develop is like this gaydar. So acknowledging the trauma that may have forced this coping mechanism while also highlighting the resiliency. Like, wow, you're really good at reading people. You're really good at deciphering if this person wants to help or hurt. So that's an example of acknowledging the trauma, where it came from, but also highlighting the resiliency with queer people. And you're going to see it a lot. There's just a certain level of resiliency queer people have, which I think is beautiful. So developing distress tolerance skills, other coping skills, and meditative practices like mindfulness, those are highly advised to add to your treatment plan with queer people. Okay, I'm just going to add one more person. And I'm also going to go to one more co-skill worksheet. Okay, and yes, everything will be available. But again, it comes with info sheets, worksheets. People love this. If you don't use mine, there's a plethora of free info sheets out there. So this is the one I tied to COVID, which works at any time besides COVID. So it's just an explanation of coping skills and getting people to do things like commit to exercise, go easy on the substances you put in your body and how much food you put into your body. Is it for fuel or for coping? Things like that. Behavioral activation, meditating and mindful practices, prayer, keeping your social network, talking to spiritual advisors. Like, these are all coping skills that we should encourage our patients to have regardless, but also particular to the queer experience. Also here, just we need to regulate people's sleep, taking the biopsychosocial model of clinical psychology. So give people tips on sleep, because often people, like, I don't know about you all, the clinicians here, your clients are sometimes surprised to know that, oh, you had coffee and a cigarette at 9 p.m. and couldn't go to sleep that night? Like, what? It's also when you assess their health psych and their insight. These things you'll learn too. Or it's with people realizing like, oh, you were on TikTok for 3 hours with the screen right in your eyes, hyperstimulating you? It's like, yeah, maybe this was.
I tell my mom that all the time.
I'm not calling anybody out here. But like, for example, just the tip, make yourself tired. Try to get exercise that will physically tire you out. Sleep is meant to help us recuperate, and this process begins best when we're tired. Try and do some physical activity early in your day as to not activate you in the hours before trying to go to bed. Remember to allow your mind to form a good link between being tired, being in bed, and then falling asleep. These are things we have to educate queer people and allies alike. So remember, coping skills are going to be very important. And then I will jump ahead to this because it's the next point on the slide. Welcome, people coming in. One thing I will recommend on the slide coming up is evaluations. Part of our treatment plans are referring people to the proper providers outside of our scope of practice. Pharmacotherapy, psychotropics can be helpful during this process, helping regulate people's anxiety, depression, and the other, or post-traumatic stress that they may be dealing with their coming out experience. I always say skills before pills, but pills if you need them. I think people unfortunately think if they're put on a psychotropic, that it's going to be forever. Yes, some do require lifelong use, and that's totally fine. Others, not so much. So if we're talking like SSRIs, for example, motivate your clients to think in terms of 6-month increments. So maybe I'll be on, Zoloft, sertraline, 6 months, or we'll try it for 18 months, something like that. Reminding your clients that this process is temporary. They will be out and authentic at some point, and the medication that's helping cage the distress while you and your therapist talk it out can also be temporary. Okay. Can you commit to 6 months? Can you commit to 12 months? Can you commit to 18 months? So this worksheet here helps explore people's relationship to medication, what stigma they may hold towards those who take psychotropics, and just important questions to help facilitate with their medical doctors. Any questions from live or virtual? Okay. All right. Oh, a huge one. I mean, I think they're all important. I put them on the slide. Psychoeducation. People need education. Your clients and allies need psychoeducation on the fluid nature of human sexuality, gender and the spectrum of gender, intimate relationships, healthy relationships, unhealthy relationships, homophobia, heterosexism, homonegativity. And this is, again, is advised for all persons. If more people had education, I don't think we'd have as much ignorance. Just sounds like cause and effect to me. And again, develop a treatment plan privy to medication management, sexual health, gender medicine, social work and services, and community engagement. So oftentimes I hear, so someone is falling into their identity, they're developing, they're growing as a queer person, and soon enough, maybe they want to start having intimacy with other members of their community. Wonderful, go for it. Do they know what they're doing? Do they know how to keep themselves safe from STI transmission? Or do they know how to safely navigate things like HIV or living with herpes or things like that? Do they know how to skillfully live their lives? Do they have enough rapport with a medical doctor who can help them with that? If not, we can help educate them on how to have these conversations. So first and foremost, referring to queer-friendly and queer-affirming medical doctors is always great. So as clinicians, develop your own little networks. Feel free to contact me for referrals as well to these providers. Clinicians specific to gender medicine, which is a growing specialty with getting more and more momentum, which I fully support. And social work, and again, this will really help you with services, social services, and community engagement. So I think in Los Angeles, I think for gay men, they have the varsity gay leagues. There's so many activities for queer people. I know there's art groups of queer artists who assemble and just show off their stuff and do mini art walks. There's just so much that can be done. So again, just connecting your patients, our clients, to as many resources that can help them immerse themselves in this community, learn about this community, and frankly, excel and flourish and find their tribe. You have to say it to welcome. Okay, any questions on the treatment plan? Okay. Yes. Okay, and again, I'm just re-highlighting the importance of family. I've asked so many clients in my life, or sometimes people come to me, they're already out, they've been, out, authentic and proud for years, they're not coming to work on their queer identity, they're coming to work on OCD or something like that. I still do gather data from them because it helps the community at large. The number one thing I keep hearing is they wish their family supported them more. Even if they were, like I had one patient who didn't care. He's like, I was being bullied, but if my brother had supported me or if my brother had spoken up for me at school, it would have been the world to me. So again, if you have a supportive family of origin, wonderful. Strengthen those relationships, and because you're afloat, help your queer counterparts also do that. Invite them over for dinner. Help, share your loving parents with other people. If you don't, try your damnedest to form a chosen family. These are the people who you're going to probably value as much or more than your biological family. So it really behooves all clinicians that work with queer people to brush up on family systems, because that's really what helps. Family systems work, Rogerian, unconditional positive regard, because think about it. If the world is going to bash on gay people, they don't need a therapist who's going to stay neutral and maybe allow them to experience the distress as well. Shower them with unconditional positive regard, because they likely haven't experienced that. You will also likely have to process that with them, because when you've been treated like crap by members of your society or your family, the first few times you're treated well by someone, it's not going to take. It's going to scare the crap out of that person. If any clinicians here can agree with that. Yes, I have a question.
I have a question for myself. How do you deal with countertransference in these things in therapy as a queer person?
Beautiful. We will get to that. There's a slide for that. I think. Oh, I hope I put it in. But yes, that will come up. Okay. The question was, how do queer clinicians deal with countertransference and parallel process while supporting patients going through a similar experience? That will get addressed. Again, also spiritual counseling congruent with culture. I always say, I had one colleague say you got to stay prayed up. So if you belong to a faith and that provides support, go for it. Lean into it as a psychologist. Lean into it. Support it. If you're not supporting their spiritual development, what are you doing? Because like Freud himself, the translation of the id was Ich. Ich is the soul also in the German translation. So even Father Freud was coming from that angle. If you couldn't tell, I'm psychoanalytically oriented. Okay, experiential time. Let's see how this goes, because I have a lot of femme presenting people in here. The internet, okay, we're getting into the experiential. What people in person are going to be asked to do, which you don't have to participate if you don't want to. No matter what your sexuality is, think and consider holding hands with someone that's either not belonging to the gender you're attracted to, or could at least ruffle feathers. Something that could spike anxiety. Think about this, and if you're in person, hold hands with someone of either the opposite or the gender you're not attracted to, or just do it for the fun of it. This is what it's like to walk around with someone that you may not be attracted. I know, this one is changing. So, instead of a lap around the block, if you're here, take a lap just around this floor and see what it's like to walk around holding hands with someone. Exactly, it's experiential. You don't have to participate. People on the internet, just think about it. Just think whatever your sexuality is, imagine what it'd be like to walk around the block of a busy boulevard, holding the hands of someone of the gender you're not typically attracted to. This is the common anxiety and fear that people experience when just trying to live authentically and just have the hand on the small of the back of someone they're involved with, or just hold their hand. So, do I have any live people who want to try it out? Yeah, I have one.
Sweating.
I need someone to grab their hand.
I'll try, I don't mind.
Yeah, you two, now you're best friends.
Hey.
I'm gonna have you two report back what it was like to walk around holding hands.
Have fun.
I mean, like, oh,
You go.
that's really funny.
Yeah.
Have fun on your stroll.
You get the strongest reactions from cis het men.
Oh, yeah.
Cisgendered heterosexual men, when they're asked to hold hands and walk around the block, they always come back like shell shock.
I think that's a really interesting point because, in South Asia, the homosexuality doesn't exist, right? Like in Sri Lanka, but men hold hands and they're affectionate sometimes.
Like kissing
They
cheeks
can-
and stuff.
And
Yeah.
even in like India and other countries in the Middle East, it's so strange because it's like,
But historically, we weren't homophobic. Like when you look at the history of it, homosexuality was accepted, and then after colonization, that's when things started to change. Even in Egypt, if you look at the hieroglyphs, I know when I went there, the tour guide was showing us stuff. And like present day, how does this city look at homosexuality? And they said the same thing, like historically it was accepted, and it was visible in the hieroglyphs. And I'm like, colonization.
Yeah, that's my understanding. I had a patient, he was from South Asia. And he was saying, he's like, the Kama Sutra had same-sex entries, but they were removed after British imperialism.
Yeah.
Fueled likely by Protestants.
wow.
Well, actually, no. Yeah.
It's interesting.
Yeah.
But it's also
didn't
very
know that.
upsetting.
Yeah, I'm sure.
Our experiential duo.
I'm really complimentary.
Okay, so we're also, while they take their stroll, watch they got interrupted. While they take their stroll, we're gonna get into allyship. Very, very, very important. So, first and foremost, the best way to be an ally to people coming out, you can be an ally even if you are queer. Let's say you are lesbian. You can still support people who are bisexual, which is, of the queer umbrella, the B, bisexual, they are the most targeted population currently. It was trans, but there is a lot more trans awareness and support and less transphobia, even within the community, which is good. We're falling out of that. And it's still the bisexuals experience the most homo negativity and internal homophobia, but not internalized. Internal, within the community, people don't believe bisexuals exist, which is horrible. Can you imagine identifying in something that other people don't believe exists? people within your community don't believe exists. So, and this is where I get a little boring because I'm just going to read off these. For our allies, ask queer loved ones if they plan to date or are actively dating. Get comfortable using the pronouns of the genders your queer loved ones are attracted to. So if someone comes out to you, just say, if they say like, oh, I'm a gay man, just say, are you dating any guys? Are you dating any men? Something as simple as that can be very affirming. Instead of, oh, are you dating anyone? Are you dating any people? Any person? Just if they've already disclosed that they're attracted to men, it's okay to use masculine pronouns. Dating any guys? So, decrease the use of words like friend when knowingly Hey, welcome back.
How was it?
There was like one person out there.
I'll get to your experience in a moment. Thank you. Yay, they came back. They're on their way back. So with allyship, decrease the use of words like friend when knowingly referring to a potential partner. I don't know if any queer people in the room have ever been out and one of their loved ones says, oh, how's your little friend? Or how's your friend? Yeah. It very much takes the wind out of queer people's sails, and it is a microaggression. Sometimes can outright be an aggression, and it's a way of saying you're still different, which is a microaggression. Other tips for allies. Ask to attend to queer spaces and acknowledge you are a guest, but not a special guest star in queer spaces. This is the feedback I hear the most. Okay, we love to have people outside of the queer community there. We love to show you our world, how beautiful it is, and how fun it is. You're still a guest, not the special guest star. And I won't get into any of the stereotypes tied to that, but we can all think of scenarios. Okay, good. Yay, no one said anything aloud. Or you're allowed, as an ally, you're allowed to say, can I come to Pride with you? Are you going to Pride? I decline any invites to Straight Pride, but how that's going to. Does that still happen, Straight Pride?
What is
Is that a
that?
thing?
Yeah, that was the
It
thing.
was like 2-3 years
The
ago.
pedo flag? Is that what we're talking
No, like you know how it's like, oh,
Oh,
y'all,
that's
you'll
hard.
have like LGBT pride, so I'm gonna have heterosexual pride.
Yeah.
It's like you're the
It's
majority,
like
you don't need pride. Yeah.
Okay, well, let's hope it died out.
Yeah.
It needs-
But you can ask as an ally to attend spaces, just as a guest. It's totally fine. Heterosexuals and allies are more than welcome to queer spaces. One of the A's in the queer alphabet stands for ally. So you're in the club. Yes, allies, connect your queer loved ones to possible partners, much like you do with your fellow heterosexual allies. But play matchmaker based off common interests and personality match, not based on the mere fact that they're queer. I have had so many clients in Los Angeles tell me that they've gone on the worst dates that were set up by their friends who meant well. The only criteria I keep hearing anecdotally are, oh, well, they were both gay. That does not mean two people should go on a blind date together or be matched together. So much like you do, because all communities refer dates to their friends. That's how people meet their partner a lot of the time. Now with the internet, people also meet, online, totally fine too. However, with heterosexual counterparts, I usually hear like, oh, they like your type of humor, or oh, they both like to jet ski, etc. But I'm not hearing that with their queer friends. So I'm like, okay, do they have a similar sense of humor? Do they have common interests? Because I do have clients that are allies, and they say like, oh yeah, I'm trying to connect my my cousin with someone, and I just remind them, okay, make sure these suitors have common interests, and that your cousin actually could love them, not the fact that they're queer. It doesn't work that way. It's not like dog breeding, where it's like, oh, male, female, okay. Okay. And please, these are coming predominantly from my clinical work and the anecdotes my patients give me. If people have other allyship suggestions, I'm willing to take them. Okay. Coming out isn't always linear, and LGBTQ persons may need support situations where they're forced and try to pass all the time still. So let's say they've come out to the world, they're out, they're proud, but they're taking a business trip to rural Tennessee. There may be moments where they have to, let's say a gay man and a heterosexual woman go on a business trip together. They're colleagues. People may say, oh, you and your wife. Instead of saying, by the way, I'm a queer man and I'm proud and this is my colleague, some people just, okay, they just walk away. They don't want to draw attention. In those moments, those are moments of stepping back towards the closet. Is that a bad thing? That's not my place to say. However, you can support your queer loved ones by not making it a big deal, or just standing up for them in moments where it is safe to challenge that and say, you know what, we're not married, he has a boyfriend, or something to that effect, but also time and place. So the same vigilance and hypervigilance your queer people had to develop, allies can also adopt for periods of time, that vigilance. That's how you help your friends. Okay. Oh, clicker. Lost my clicker. Okay, more on how to ally. Let's breeze through these because we may bleed over, and I don't want that. I know people got lives. Okay, this is a big one. Asking about queer status. Like, one example is, how do you identify? Instead of directly saying, are you gay? So asking about their status gives a person a chance to confirm their identity. Waiting for them to disclose their queer status lends them a chance to affirm their identity. Both can be fine. People have different goals. Choose accordingly. You know your queer loved ones better than other people. Hopefully they know themselves better. Hopefully a good therapist has helped them. So pro tip, asking yes/no questions, it asserts privilege. Wait a minute, it's like saying, like, are you Mexican? It's like, what? So instead of saying, are you queer? How about, how do you identify, son? Or how do you identify, friend? Those are the more affirming ways to inquire about someone's status. Okay? And to allied clinicians, here's a bold one. Try starting therapy with stating your pronouns and sexual orientation. Sounds strange at first, right? But this is experiential, humanistic, and facilitates the therapeutic frame from a place of collaboration, which is a pillar in culturally responsive psychotherapy. If the demographic page asks all that info, maybe get comfortable being vulnerable and authentic with stating the same thing. Or if you don't feel as comfortable with disclosing your orientation, which honestly isn't that bad, you can at least start with pronouns. That lets people know that dog whistle is like, oh, I'm open to understanding things are on a continuum. So that's my suggestion. My psychoanalytic counterparts would say no, but whatever. Just don't do it. And for parents in particular, or mentors, try direct affirmation, such as, if you're queer, know that I love and support you, instead of, I still love you. Avoid. Exactly. Ooh, good. I'm getting a good rise out of the live people. Exactly. If you're like, you know, son, if you're gay, I still love you. That's a microaggression right there. So just saying, if you're queer, know that I love and support you. Okay. It can subtly reinforce heteronormativity. It's a microaggression. So try to avoid statements like, I don't care either way if you're queer. You should care. That's what allyship is. It's I care about you enough to help and protect you. If you don't care either way, why are you having this conversation? I remember my aunt told me, she's like, I don't care if you're a zebra. And I was like, okay. She loves me. So I was just like, yeah, it was a different time. Okay. Okay. Remember, the better ways to affirm something is to directly say it, not imply it. Okay. If any of these notions cannot comfortably come out of your mouth, then you're simply not ready, and that is okay. Allyship is a skill to develop. I'm not expecting someone to instantly be the, the P flag mom from Queer as Folk. That's a dated analogy. There was a mom who was very much a proud queer affirming mom. So it's a skill to develop. If this doesn't comfortably come out of your mouth, or these notions or phrases, it's okay. Take time, reflect, develop this. Allyship, again, is a skill, and it's a beautiful skill to develop that will take time. Much like your queer loved ones, it's taking them time to affirm themselves and affirm their identity. So it's a process for everybody. Okay, local resources. These are specific to LA. So as always, I have my worksheets. The AIDS Life Cycle is a wonderful organization. I know they're based in San Francisco, but the cycle ends in Los Angeles, so that's where I'll take it for like the pot at the end of the rainbow, the gold pot. And going forward, a lot of queer organizations use acronyms these days for their rebranding, and I completely respect that. I know in academia we're supposed to spell something out and then show the acronyms, but many queer organizations, especially the ones that are a few decades old, they used evolving terminology. So APLA stands for AIDS Project Los Angeles. However, they've developed into a federally qualified health center, so they treat everybody. So that's why they rebranded, but I do respect the change. So APLA is a wonderful resource. I think the headquarters is not too far from here, on Wilshire, I think. Cheer Los Angeles, again, connecting people to resources and philanthropic groups, volunteer opportunities, and just pro-social behaviors is an organization. The LA LGBT Center is a wonderful resource with a plethora of additional resources, such as the LGBT Youth Center, which can help unsheltered queer teens, which is a beautiful resource if they get kicked out for coming out. PFLAG, which I love, PFLAG LA. Parents, and they just go by PFLAG now too. But formerly we're known as Parents and Family of, or Parents and Friends. I think Parents and Family of Lesbian and Gays. We know that there's more than just lesbian and gays in the queer community, so we move on. Trans Wellness Center, wonderful resource. And also tied to LGBT Center is the Youth Center on Highland. So that is, I don't think it's a transitional home, I think it's another shelter for queer teens. So resources, resources, resources. National resources, now these are the ones I attach on my worksheets because anyone around the world could download these things. And in the United States, so I'll just run through them really fast. California Youth Crisis Line, Child Welfare Information Gateway, Gay and Lesbian Medical Association, but again, they rebranded because it's more. Gay Men's Health Center, which again has rebranded to GMHC. APS, National Domestic Violence Lifeline, the National Alliance NAMI on Mental Illness, National Suicide Prevention Lifeline, 1-800-273-TALK. They also have a text line too. I think if you text 414141 or something, 471-471, someone will respond. So there's a text line too. SAMHSA for substance recovery and the Trevor Project. Okay, and here's some of my closing thoughts. And I'm just going to read this off as well. Coming out is a major life disclosure event unique to queer folks. It's an event that can promote a sense of community at its best and symptoms of post-traumatic stress near its worst. Coming out can be cathartic and painful at first, but liberating in the long run. Acknowledging and disclosing one's identity within the queer community is necessary for healthy psychological development. Yet, little research and protocol exists to help inform queer-affirming psychotherapy and treatment planning. To date, the best practices have come from positive psychology, which has been Eurocentric and less inclusive to ethnic and religious minorities to date. As such, coming out can be more challenging for people of color and those belonging to a faith. This can be compounded by anti-queer laws supporting homophobia and maintaining and perpetuating heterosexism and homonegativity. Coming out can become a more positive experience with help from queer-affirming psychotherapy and treatment planning with clinicians skilled in identifying and treating the key elements and stressors of this experience. Those are my closing thoughts on that. And here are some references. Don't mind the mistakes that I would always get all my students for. So I do still want to talk about parallel process for queer clinicians. And just letting people know, I do have a talk next week. It's solely webinar. It's being virtual, hosted by my practice. I'm diving more in depth in straight acting and playing it straight. And I'm doing this one, Let's Talk About Coming Out, condensed 2 Thursdays out or 3 Thursdays out on June 16th. Same time, both are from noon to 1:30. So if people would like to sign up for those, please feel free to drop your email in the box to be put on the listserv to get these announcements. And if you're here in person, sign the attendance thing and let me know if you want to be on the listserv, and you'll get information on those 2 free webinars. Jumping back to parallel process as a clinician, it's how, honestly, most of the things we hear, either we've gone through with our clients in our own personal life, or we've heard someone go through it, or we've supported someone, or we've witnessed it. So the queer experience is nothing that different. If a person has, working with queer patients and being a queer clinician will definitely motivate you to work on your own identity development if you haven't already. So that's part of the parallel process. Definitely be connected to your own psychotherapist if you're a queer clinician working with queer persons, to help you strengthen or develop your queer identity. But also, some of the material may be triggering. It may be very similar, or it may bring up things you haven't resolved for yourself. So first and foremost, again, have your own talk therapy as a clinician, which I think is just invaluable. And then I support a humanistic approach, but just be mindful of venting too much of your issues and your experiences onto the client. We still are, yes, it's an intimate service, but it's still a professional service. So it behooves us to still keep those professional boundaries. So when you are queer and a clinician and working with queer people, some anecdotes can be helpful. Sharing from your experiences from a humanistic approach can be helpful, but just don't turn it into friendship. This is still clinical psychology at the end of the day. That's why we're motivating them to find friends. Friends of the people they can get, really nitty gritty and they can really let their hair down. With us, there's still that air of wanting to please us a little bit, which is okay. It helps with accountability, but just don't dive too much into your experience. If something resonates, and who knows, maybe you share a laugh, you shed a tear, that's a beautiful human moment. And that's fine to highlight in the treatment. If that becomes what treatment looks like, it's just the two of you in your dyad support group, maybe think about referring out, maybe think about getting your own supervision and consultation, and talk about it with your own therapist, because training clinicians and all clinicians should be connected to some sort of consult group for their own talk therapy. Okay, I think I covered a whole lot.
What about the holding hands? I want to know that.
Oh yeah, I did want to hear about your experience. What was it like holding hands around doing a lap?
I think it was just strange because of the whole thing. Like, I'm not attracted to women, so my mind immediately went to like the concept that you talked about like making straight, or I think that's what it was.
Straight acting.
Yeah, straight acting. And I was like, that's where my mind went, where this is what maybe that feels like, where you're maybe walking around the hallways in high school and feeling like this, it doesn't feel like authentic to be walking around with someone that I'm not attracted to, but doing it because it keeps you safe. Yeah, but I feel like maybe I didn't feel like uncomfortable. There was like nobody out there, so I was just like walking around holding hands, just like chit-chatting. But I feel like that's where my mind immediately kind of went to. It just didn't feel like authentic to me. Yeah.
Okay, so the general consensus for people still on the internet, it felt inauthentic to be participating in this. So that was just a snippet of the inauthenticity that queer people can hold and have to cling to survive. Do you have any input?
I felt like I was just walking with a friend who needed someone to talk to.
Yay,
And although I'm not sexually or romantically attracted to women as well, I found that the opportunity to be able to put myself in the position of what it would like to be a gay assigned female at birth. I think it gives me the opportunity, honestly, to be able to understand what it's like to come out in a public area with someone that I could be with. And especially because it is an experience, there's always the opportunity to learn and grow from it. And at least you can be able to say, not only was I able to see what it's like, but now it gives me a bigger perspective and how to be able to help those.
Thank you. So the general consensus was it helped develop allyship skills. It helped put you in the mindset of what that's like, and helped put you in the mindset of being supportive to someone trying something different while trying something different for yourself. Thank you. Okay. I think I said everything. So thank you everyone for your time. Thank you everyone on the internet for showed up. If people still have questions, I would love to answer them. I'll be here for a few minutes. Other than that, thank you.
Oh, very good question, I think.
Okay.
I just heard. No, someone was speaking.
Yeah, does someone have a question?
Oh yeah, I said thank you very much for presenting today. I did have a question for you. Let's see, I had two. One is, okay, so if you assess whether or not somebody is ready to come out and maybe they're not ready, then does the focus of treatment become kind of exploring those barriers to coming out and the past trauma that like where you kind of focus on, or do you find that some people can live full lives without ever fully coming out? What's your experience with that sort of dynamic?
Yeah, I have seen people live their lives without fully coming out. I've often seen it as a survival tactic. When I do inquire with the few clients I have that stay partially closeted, they still wish they could be fully out. And I've seen a lot of people shift from wanting to be openly gay to honestly gay. So it's not that they have to brandish their flags, but if someone just inquired, or if they just felt, if someone inquired, they wanted to feel comfortable enough to say yes, or just talk about their queer life, or in other instances, they just want to feel the comfort of using the pronouns that they want to, of the people that they're dating, or they want to be able to as freely talk about their husband. So let's say they're a gay man. They want to talk about their husband, much like their coworkers talk about their wives.
Mm-hmm.
So people can, I mean, queers are resilient. So some can still live with a tinge of inauthenticity and still survive. I mean, queers are very resilient people. So thank you for asking me.
Yeah, and I like that it kind of ties into your idea of, building your own supportive family if the people around you aren't as accepting. And that kind of separates you from, or the person coming out from feeling like all of the pressure is kind of on them, or if these people don't accept you, it's your fault, and that's not true. So I like the idea of kind of building your own social support, because I see that a lot. Well, some people kind of. Well, your family's your family, right? So you're not feeling accepted by them is very difficult. So the idea of creating a new one, I think, sometimes can be very helpful for people coming out. It might be an idea that they don't think about. I've definitely seen that in my family with my cousins. We're from a Latino background. She had a really difficult time feeling accepted by a lot of the people in our family, and she was kind of alone for a while. So the fact that all these resources are available for people that had experiences like her are really eye-opening. So it's really nice to learn about those in your talk today.
Well, very happy to share it with everybody.
Yes. And does anyone else online have any other questions for Dr. E? It looks like we're down to about 5 people here.
I have a question. First of all, I will say I'm not a clinician. I was here just more to know how to be an ally. And so I was very struck by the slides you were doing about supporting someone who is coming out. And I was wondering about trying to avoid some microaggressions, including, sometimes I've heard stories of people saying, "Oh yeah, I knew, but thank you for coming out to me. I will love and support you." All that. Would that be considered? Could it be considered as triggering for the person coming out? Is it something to avoid confirming like, "Oh yes, I knew," kind of thing, but didn't want to pressure you?
Quick answer is yes. I've heard it from, I want to say like 6 different clients that their first response was, "I kind of knew," or "I always knew." And it's kind of that one-upping each other. It's like, okay, I still have to assert that I was more knowledgeable. Or I still have to, and then I also hear it kind of as defensiveness sometimes, because who wants to acknowledge like, "Oh, you pulled a fast one on me"? Because sometimes people do view it as that. Sometimes the people who are closeted view it as they're tricking people, which needs to be deconstructed. And sometimes the people who are being came out to, or the allies, assert that as well. They assert that, I have to let them know that I always knew, or they didn't pull a fast one on me, even if they're completely shocked. So yes, I highly discourage saying little comments, even if it's a joke about like, "I always knew." Because the number one thing I always hear, especially with those 6 clients, they're like, well, why didn't you ask? Or why didn't you make this easier for me? Or why didn't you help? So again, well, as I was saying earlier, humor is a way to make difficult conversations and difficult topics a little more palatable. At the end of the day, there's still some truth. The truth behind that can be, I still want you to know that I'm still superior. Or I still want you to know that you didn't pull a fast one on me. Or I still want you to know that what you disclosed to me was worthy of disclosure.
Thank
Does that
you.
answer your question?
Yes, thank you very much.
And I really want to emphasize too, microaggressions, stepping on people's toes are going to happen in allyship. They happen all the time. They do. All that needs to be done is being accountable. It's like, wow. Even if it surprises you, it's instead of just saying, I didn't do that, or that's not how I intended it. Stop. It's just saying, wow, I didn't know that this hurt you. I apologize. Then building from there. Because the first thing people do when an aggression or microaggression has been noticed, the person who committed it is usually quick to say, I didn't do that. That's not how I intended it. Or, come on, you know me. I didn't mean it that way. Just acknowledge someone felt some type of way and move from there.
Thank you. I really appreciate that.
Any other questions from the internet people?
Do you think the very question asking somebody how you identify could be considered a microaggression, depending on like where they are, if at all, at any point in their coming out process? Because it kind of implies that you might be assuming that they are queer. Does that make sense?
I can see that.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I can see that. That question was more geared towards parents in particular.
Okay. Do you find in your clinical practice that there is an approach that results with less likelihood of committing a microaggression?
Genuinely waiting. But that's not always the best route for people to take. Waiting and letting other people say, this is my status. This is my identity. That's usually the most seamless way, but that also allows people to live a certain lifestyle that could also be full of microaggressions or aggressions. So very delicate. That's why, again, develop that ironclad, bulletproof rapport with the client that helps them really tell you where they're coming from so that you can understand, were your parents always jokesters or are they super serious? So that you can understand the context of when they bring back the material that they have with their mother.
Oh, okay, that's helpful. Yeah. Thank you.
Got a few more minutes if people have other questions.
Oh, are you going to make this presentation available to us or put it on your website? Or
Yes, great question. The slides I'm making available off my website, and then this video recording I'm giving to both True Colors, the host, and also this will also be a download available on my website.
Okay, great.